Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Google GMP Academy event. Today, we meet to discuss some of the advanced features of the Firebase Engage suite. The session will equip you with tools that will help you to control app UI and UX remotely via Firebase console, to apply changes to the app without republishing it, and to test the changes safely before rolling them out to all users. Please let us introduce ourselves. I'm Boris from Google Professional Services team, focusing on app promotion.
Hi everyone, my name is Vitaly. I'm from the same team as Boris, focusing on mobile web and other mobile solutions, and we'll be happy to show you a little bit of demonstration of the features we're going to talk about today.
Awesome, thank you, Vitaly. As mentioned, Vitaly and I will talk about Firebase features that deal with app UI and UX. As a remark, we are both advertising solution architects. Hence, we keep in mind the advertising context all the time. Today's session is definitely relevant to ads because better app UX and better app UI optimize the road to conversion, helping app campaigns to perform better. Okay, our agenda for today will contain 3 parts. Actually, we will talk about the business rationale behind the features, see a live demo, and discuss implementation nuances. The last part will be a bit more techy, in my opinion, and contain code examples. No worries, it's not extremely technical, and I definitely urge you to see how it is implemented. When Firebase is mentioned, it's usually associated with analytics capabilities. We hear names like Firebase Analytics, Google Analytics 4, G4. Advertisers, partners, and Google worked hard in 2021 and 2022 implementing the Firebase Analytics into applications. We recommended implementing analytics not only for user activity measurement, but also for better app bidding in Google Ads, app campaigns. Analytics is widely used in the context of audience building, segmentation, monitoring, predictive events. And while analytics in the core of many activities, it's only one of the Firebase functionalities. Let's look at Firebase more broadly. Firebase is Google's app development platform that contains multiple features under one umbrella. The goal is to help app developers to build and maintain better apps. We usually break the features into 3 main buckets. A, it's build bucket, which helps to build a better app. It contains authentication feature, storage and hosting services, databases, etc. Test and monitor bucket improves app quality via performance monitoring, crash monitoring via Crashlytics, and some other features. While engage bucket, which we talk about today, allows to interact with apps users directly via messaging or personalized user experience. I'll go even further one step and say that while analytics is one of the Firebase capabilities, the Firebase itself is just the peak of another iceberg, a fraction of opportunities that Google Cloud provides. Remember, Firebase is a cloud project. Google Cloud, however, is another topic for a different advanced discussion. Today, we will focus on Firebase Engage specifically, and even more specifically on UI and UX features that are based on remote configuration, or we call it remote config. We can call it even RC during our presentation. All right. In our session, we will talk about remote config feature, A/B testing feature, and personalization feature. These 3 features are, in my opinion, elegant, simple to implement, and can provide significant value to app customers. As a disclaimer, the A/B testing and personalization features are still in beta status. Our discussion is technical today, but the product can change or evolve. Why do we want to speak about these features today? Google and Google partners provide a service of app UI and UX audits. The activation of these 3 features, in my opinion, is the next step. Naturally. After the audit, we know what adjustments we might want to implement and test. Today, we will learn how we can do it. First, let's speak about remote config, which allows us to change the app's look and feel remotely via Firebase console. Think about remote config as a key value object, that defined and managed remotely. The object is pulled by Firebase SDK in real time from Firebase backend into the app and allows us to make UX and UI changes without republishing the app. Let me emphasize it, without republishing the app. It allows to customize content and features for our users, make rollouts gradual, basically add significant independence to UX and marketing teams, to your designers, to control the app's look and feel, without bothering or be dependent on developers all the time. It gives marketeers and designers more power. Typical use cases. Typical use cases will include ability to, for example, tweak onboarding flow by offering different subscription funnels to heavy versus light trial users. It allows to control ad frequency, which mainly relevant for marketing or ad monetization teams. It allows to control color palette, which can be relevant for designers, or localize messages to specific geography or group of users, like hello versus hola. It can be controlled. After defining the remote config within the app and defining the configuration on the Firebase backend, we get the ability to control app UX and UI remotely. The A/B testing feature allows us to test different hypotheses before we push our changes to all users. As an important remark, the A/B testing features does not require any additional coding within the app. The variants of the test are controlled in the Firebase console. With A/B testing, we can make safe data-driven decisions. Test our hypothesis in parallel or sequentially. Decide which changes to roll out and which changes to hold with. A/B testing feature is flexible, and we can use it and based it on dynamic audiences. A classical use example or a classical use case would be ad frequency optimization. We talk ads, let's talk about ad frequency. For example, a game. Let's say our goal is to earn additional revenue without hurting user experience or retention. The hypothesis is the current ad frequency might be overly conservative. KPIs that we measure would be user engagement or the rate of uninstalls. We can test 10% of traffic and break our variants to A, control variant with existing frequency, showing a rewarded video every 3 levels, versus new variant B, which shows a rewarded video every 2 levels. We can also create variant C, D, and so on. Non-less elegant feature based on remote config is the Firebase personalization that uses Firebase machine learning power to optimize user experience automatically based on objectives of our choice. The main idea of personalization is that it automatically assigns each user to an optimal experience. It continuously learns from the previous decisions, it adapts and improves decisions over time. Let's get back to the previous example with A/B testing of ad frequency in a game. With personalization, we actually delegate the optimization decisions to machine learning. The process is set ad frequency parameter in remote config, which controls ad frequency within the app, create a personalization setup with 2, 3, or 4 variants that control ad frequency, set an objective to, for example, more ad clicks, and personalization automatically selects an ad frequency for each user to maximize the chosen objective. To Vitaly, it will show an ad every 3 levels. To me, it will show an ad every 2 levels, for example. A few words about the developer journey before we switch to demo. The journey includes 4 main steps. First of all, on board with Analytics, GA4, and Firebase remote config implementation. B, configure app experience using param values. Remember, remote config is an object of key value settings that go back from Firebase console to the app. Set up A/B test or personalization options with relevant objective in Firebase console. And then after the test, view results in console. I would like to emphasize again that the setup does not require a lot of coding. Once the remote config object is configured, the work is done mainly in the Firebase console. A quick success, success example with OneFootball. OneFootball is a football/soccer app. OneFootball provides match scores, user-generated content, and content created by the newsroom or bloggers. They tested top news section in the app's newsstream before releasing it to all users, and worried that users would stop at the news they would like to read without scrolling further. If so, the concern was that the app would see less revenue from digital ads. It's critical for business. By using remote config Firebase Analytics and A/B test, OneFootball was able to prove that higher engagement doesn't hurt their revenues. Just one of many examples. You can see more use cases in our documentation. Great. Please let me pass the microphone to my colleague Vitaly, who will show you the features, how they implemented. Vitaly, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Boris. Thank you, Boris, for giving us a great overview of Firebase Engage features and what it has to offer for real business use cases. The next part of our session would be a real-life demonstration of how this feature can actually work. This demonstration would be split into two parts. At the beginning, I would like to show you how you can use remote config using Firebase Console UI. This is mostly aimed for marketing department who's going to make the changes to the app without even involving a development team. And the second part of the demo will be actually more technical. And in that part, I will show you how we can actually integrate Firebase SDK to the application. And I'm going to use Android as an example. So let me start sharing my screen. So here you can see the sample application that I'm going to use for the demo today. It's kind of a simplified version of an e-commerce application that has two screens. It has the catalog and it has the cart screen. And what it can do, we can add products to our cart, change the number of products in the cart. And instead of purchasing the products, we can send purchase data event. This is actually sending an event to Google Analytics. It's a purchase event with the value of the purchase and euro currency. And this is also going to be our conversion event that we will try to optimize for. What you can see right now is the default behavior of this application, which is hard-coded in the app. So let's take a look at Firebase Console and see how we can use remote config to actually modify it. So this is the Firebase Console UI and specifically remote config page of the Firebase Console, in which you can see an overview of how often my remote configuration has been actually fetched by this application in the last 24 hours. What I want to show you is that my app is already configured to use 3 different parameters, which are responsible for different aspects of the user interface of the app. I have the background color, which is currently white, which is configured in my remote config. I have price tag, which is responsible for the color of those circles, showing the price for each product. And I have button by color, which is responsible for the color of this button. If you noticed, and if you're really good with color codes, you could have noticed that the color code of the price tag is actually different from the color that we see on the device. The reason for that is because I just launched my application and it didn't really actually download the remote configuration from the server yet. So it uses the default values hard-coded in the application. So let's go ahead and actually fetch the remote configuration to see how it will change the experience. All right, so that's quite different experience. We got the different color for the price and the background, and that's all possible by using remote configuration. So let's see how we can actually configure this parameter and maybe change it in the real time right now. When we're creating or editing the parameter, first of all, we need to specify the parameter name or the key. And that's quite important. This key should be unique, and this key should correspond to the same. You should use the same key in the code when you're fetching this value from the remote configuration. So please make sure developers are aware of the parameter names that you're going to use and configure in the UI. In addition to the name, you can actually specify data type for the key. String is kind of generic, and it can work for most of the use cases. But for some extra data validation and extra safety, you can choose a specific data type. Let's say you want to control some kind of a feature flag. By using remote config, you want to make sure that some users will have this feature enabled or disabled. In this case, you could actually go ahead and use Boolean value, which won't allow you to specify some random value for this parameter, but the only allowed value is going to be a true or false, meaning disabled or enabled. In my case, I want to use string because I'm using color code. You can also give optional description. This is pretty self-explanatory. If you have a lot of parameters, this might be helpful to understand which parameter is responsible for what in your application. And now we're reaching the value itself, and it might be a bit confusing at first because you have a default value and then you have an in-app default. So just to reiterate and stop here for a second, as I mentioned in the beginning, there is a default value that you want to have in the application on the first launch without any connectivity or any remote configuration being fetched. This is your safety net. You never know how your application is going to be launched for the first time. It can be that it has no internet access, and then it won't be able to fetch whatever you configure in Firebase. So for that case, we're using in-app default. Then if you think that your in-app default is good enough and you don't really want to override it, then you can just toggle this on. And let's actually see what it will do. But before that, I'm just going to save this color code. So once we toggle this on and we publish the change to our remote configuration, we're going to see that my application for this specific parameter is going to use the default value that we've seen from the very beginning when we just launched the app. Now let's try and change the color to, let's say I want it to be this bright blue color. And let's save it. And again, before you publish the changes, you can feel free to make any changes you want. As you can see, I'm refreshing. By refreshing, by the way, my application is configured to fetch the new configuration. Usually, you wouldn't like to do that this way in the production app, but for the demo purposes, that was the most convenient. So now I can publish the changes and see the bright blue color applies to my application. So that's the very basic how you can control the remote the parameter value using the remote configuration. But we can go ahead and make it a bit more advanced. You don't have to always just use the default value for every user. You can actually play with conditional values. And I want to create a new condition. Let's say I want price tag to be of a different color for users that made a purchase. So let's say I want purchasers. This color is not related to the price tag. It's a color of the condition. We'll see it a bit later, but I want it to be the same. I want the color of the price tag to be the same color as the color of the condition. And so I want purchasers to get orange price tags. So I will configure my condition as I will specify the application, first of all. So my Firebase project has a few apps, so I'm going to use Firebase Engage. That's the one I'm running on the left. And I also want to actually use the audience that is coming from Google Analytics integration with Firebase. So I want users that are part of the purchaser's audience to get a different color of the price tag. Yes, that sounds good. Let's create this condition. And we want to give it an orange color. Let's save. And let's take a look for a second. So what's going to happen when we publish the change? Whenever the application will get the remote configuration, it will go through some kind of a decision tree. First, it will check, is this user part of the condition? Does the condition actually being true for this user? And if it's true, they're going to get this orange color that I have specified. If it's false, it's going to use the default. And you can see it right here, very visually clear in the Firebase console UI. So let's publish the changes and see how it changes the application behavior. So this user has actually made the purchase, so we got the orange. But let's actually start from the beginning and see how it dynamically changes the behavior. So here we have the new user that didn't make any changes yet, any purchases yet. Let's get the config. We're getting the blue color, which is the default. Now we're gonna buy an apple. And just bear in mind that updates to the audiences can take some time, but I'm gonna hope that it's gonna work pretty quickly. So I just made the purchase. That means that the user is gonna be included to the purchaser's audience shortly. And if we will refresh our remote config, at a certain point, I would expect to get the orange color. Let's give it a few minutes to propagate. And for the time being, I want to explore a little bit more what you have here in the console. So whenever you make any change, it's actually being saved. So there is a nice change history page that you can take a look. And if you're not sure who made the change or when specific change to the remote configuration was made, you can always take a look at this page and compare any version of your remote configuration to any other version. In addition to that, we have the conditions page, which lists all the possible conditions you have created. And you can also modify the conditions priority. So let's see if we got our update. Well, not yet. And so I'll try another condition just so you can see it working, because I believe the audience might take some time to update. So let's say I want to have a condition based on time. Right now it's 12:23 my time zone. So I will create a new condition that would be based on time. And let's say I want, by the way, when you're targeting, when you're creating your condition, you can use platform and languages and countries. As Boris mentioned, you can use it for localization of specific buttons. So there is a plenty of options here. Daytime is convenient for promotions. So I'm going to use daytime, and I want to say after today, 12:26, let's say, in 2 minutes from now. I'm going to create this condition, and I'm going to use, let's say, some kind of a pink color so we can actually differentiate between those, and save and publish. And let's take a look at what we have here. So first of all, the remote configuration going to check if I'm the part of the purchaser's audience. And let me verify that I have configured it properly. User audience includes, yes, all right. So if I am part of the purchaser's audience, I'm going to get the orange color. If not, I'm going to move to the next condition. If you want to change the priority of those, you can go here to the conditions tab and actually drag and drop. So I want time-based condition priority to be higher than the purchaser's orange condition. Let's verify that it affected the decision-making tree correctly. Now time-based is on top, and we can publish these changes to actually see, take it into the effect. So now let's update my app. It's 12:25 my time, so it's going to be changing the color of the time based on this condition in 1 minute. And I will just make another purchase for the time being to see maybe we will be able to propagate the audience in some point of time. So that's kind of an overview of how remote configuration basically works and how you can change the values dynamically without making any changes to the code and without waiting for your application to be published to the store to go through the review process. And that's the main benefit. And we will see now how this ability of changing the behavior of the app can actually be advanced and be in condition to the capabilities of in addition to capabilities of analytics of measuring can give us a nice synergy for more advanced features. So we got our time-based condition. That was really bad color choice, but we see that this condition worked now. So we passed the time that I specified, and we got the different color. So to be honest, I want to remove that. I don't like that color. So let's keep it. Let's keep it how it was before. All right. So as I said, now we have the capability to change the behavior, and we have the analytics capabilities to measure the behavior. It gives us the recipe to actually experiment and see which behaviors of the app perform better. I want to continue experimenting with the price tag color and show you the capabilities of experimenting or running A/B tests using Firebase console. So here, as well as creating new condition, we can create an experiment to test one or more values before changing the behavior for every user. For every experiment, we need to give it a name, and so I'll keep it generic, experiment with price tag. And we can give it also a description, up to you. If you run a lot of experiments, that might be useful. The next thing we need to specify when creating an experiment is the targeting. So we need to select my app again, because my project has quite a few. And usually when you're going to run A/B test, you probably want to target just a fraction of your users. You don't want to expose this new behavior to everyone. In my case, I want it to be 100%, just to make sure that I will actually get it on the emulator here on the left. And optionally, you can also specify an activation event, which means you want to only run A/B test for users that perform certain action in the app. So you can trigger an event when this action happens, and then use that event here in the console as the activation event. I'm going to skip that for now. Another thing we need to specify for the experiment is the goal. So when running an experiment, we're doing it not for just fun. We're doing it because we want to improve a certain metric. In my case, as I mentioned a bit earlier, this is an imitation of e-commerce application. So our goal is to generate revenue by increasing the amount of purchases. So that's the metric that I'm going to choose. I'm going to choose purchase event, which is coming from analytics, as our goal. And now, by the amount of purchases, we're going to define which variant is actually performing better. In addition to the primary metric to track, and this is the metric that's going to actually define which variant performs better, we want to maybe track some other metrics, just to make sure that while improving our target KPI, we're not harming some other KPIs which are also important for us as a business. And that might be the ratio and the amount of crash-free users, just to make sure that our changes to the remote config don't create any technical problems in the application. We can track retention if users actually keep using the app. And in my case, it could be interesting to look at, let's say, purchase revenue. We can also optimize for purchase revenue and keep tracking the amount of purchases. Now we move on, and we're actually getting to the variants. So usually when you're running A/B tests, it's really up to you. It's really up to you how many options you want to compare at the same time. I want to keep it simple for the demo, and I'm going to use the baseline as the no change. So I want to compare whatever we have right now in the application, whatever is default behavior, with some new option. Let's say I've talked to my designers and they say that, well, orange is really going to work well in the app. But I'm not sure. So what I want to do, I want to A/B test it, and I want to compare how orange color will actually perform in comparison to whatever we already have defined in the app. So in this case, I'm going to keep baseline unchanged. I'm going to go ahead and take variant A and change it to orange. You can also notice that there is an option to add another parameter here to include into variant. And generally, the best practice for A/B testing is to do it isolated. But there are some cases when you might want to change two parameters at the same time. And those are the cases when those parameters are very much related to each other. In my case, it's not configured this way. But in my case, if I would have a parameter that would be controlling the text color of the price tag, that would really make sense to actually change as well. As we could see earlier today, when I picked this background color, it didn't work well with the price tag. So this is another example. If you have price tag being connected to the background, you want them to have contrast. So that might be a use case for you to change two parameters at once. Again, for the time being, I want to keep it simple. I verify that this orange looks fine as the background for white, so it's going to be fine. Last thing you can do when you're configuring a new experiment is to adjust variant weights. As you can see here, there is a warning that uneven weights may increase data collection time. Again, the platform gives you the capability to do what you want. The methodology of running A/B test, this is up to you, but just so you know, you have those options. And you can also run more variants, but as I said, let's keep it simple for now. And let's review my configuration. We didn't start the experiment yet, so this is still in the draft. We can give it a review just to make sure that we configured everything correctly. Our primary goal was going to be purchase. We track some secondary goals, and we're targeting Firebase Engage 100%. Okay, that looks good to me. But I want to test things and actually make sure how they're going to look before I roll it out. So there isn't a capability to add a test device to your A/B test configuration to actually receive specific variant and see how it looks. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Here we have Manage Test Devices section, and we need to provide a token. So there are two types of tokens that you can provide to identify your device. It can be either Firebase Installation Auth token or Firebase Cloud Messaging. If you're using push notifications in your Android applications, you have access to Firebase Cloud Messaging, and that might be the easier option for you to retrieve. Although, if you're using Google Analytics at least in your application, then you also have Firebase Installation Auth. So I'm going to switch to the code real quickly, not for a long time. I just want to get this token. So it's going to be printed in my logs. Let's generate the token. I will copy that. And add this here. Let's go back to my main activity. All right. So for the time being, anyways, we're getting the baseline, right? We said no change is the baseline. So let's change this to variant A. And I would expect my test device to get the orange color now. Here we are. So, all right, it looks good. I want to start experiment. Let's just verify that the baseline is indeed looks as expected. Perfect. So we can roll this out. Now let's take a look how our remote configuration looks as a whole. So we did quite a few changes to the price tag. We specified the default value, and then we specified the conditional value, and then we specified the A/B test. So you can always refer to this page in the Firebase console UI to verify the priority of how those values are going to be applied to your users. And the A/B test, in this case, you can see it takes priority over the conditional values and the default values. If we look at this experiment in more details, we see that there is not much information actually happening. There is not much happening in this dashboard. There is not much data because we just started the experiment. So I actually been running another experiment for quite some time before that to show you how this dashboard is going to look like. The background color you can see here is actually being A/B tested at the moment. So if I'll go back and just clean my app and start it from scratch, we might get a different background color. So this time we got the pink one. If we'll do that again, we got the blue one. So this is actually because I'm running an active A/B test that is comparing the pink and the blue and the baseline. Let's take a look at how this dashboard of the experiment does look like. So, all right, that's interesting. First of all, you get this highlight on top. If your experiment been running for quite some time and Firebase already can give you a suggestion with high probability or high level of confidence, you're going to get it right here. So what does it actually mean? It says light blue is outperforming baseline by 37%. Let's look closer to what it actually means. And down here, you can have, you see that table that is divided into two parts and give you some statistics about each of the variants that you've been running. Let's focus at the observed data for a sec. This is the actual data that happened to your application. You can see the actual amount of purchases that users that got specific variant have made. You can see the conversion rate, and you can see the difference of specific variant from the baseline. Indeed, we can see that the light blue has generated much more purchases, even though roughly the same amount of users have received this variant, and the conversion rate is much higher than the baseline and much higher than another variant that we've been testing. You can also get familiar with some model data. Again, in this case, the model data has really, really high accuracy because this test was imitated, and these are not real users. But in real life scenario, the model data will give you a little bit more information about how probably and with how much of a confidence you can actually expect this variant to perform better. You can also see how it was behaving and how those variants were performing over the time, over the last 7 days, or if we look a little bit further back, you can see here I was playing with configuration until I figured it out. So it actually shows you the historical view. And those are the additional metrics that we also set up. So by looking at the purchase event, we can define the winner, but we also make sure that crash-free users are still at the good level, that the purchase revenue is fine and didn't decrease for specific of the variant. And we can also check other metrics that we decided to keep an eye on while running the experiment. So that is basically it about A/B testing. And there is another feature that Boris mentioned today, which is personalization. So if you think about it, to run A/B test, you actually need to know something about your users. You need to group them in a way that is controllable by a human being. In case of the personalization, you can let go and you can actually give all of that control to the machine learning engine, which is being added to analytics and remote control infrastructure. So let's see how we can actually configure this personalization feature here in the console. Same as we did with conditional values and A/B testing, we can add new personalization to let machine learning determine the best experience for every user. We need to specify certain alternatives. So we keep experimenting with the price tag. So let's say I want it to be kind of this color. And maybe something red. All right, so that's going to be my alternatives. Now we need to choose the objective. So same as for A/B test, in the case of my sample application, I want to increase the revenue that my app is generating for me. So I'm going to choose purchase event as the objective. And I can also choose between count and the sum. This is quite new for personalization. And if you choose sum, you can actually optimize for the aggregation of certain event parameter. Every purchase event in Google Analytics would have the value parameter, which contains the actual revenue that this purchase event bringing to you. So I want to optimize for that. I want to optimize for the sum of the revenue that purchase events are bringing in my app. So that's how I set it up. In addition, same as an A/B test, we can specify some additional metrics to track, like crash-free users, user engagement time. This is all the same. So we will go next, and we need to specify target condition. So again, I just want all the users of my app to be personalized. So I'm going to use this Firebase engage users. But you can always create new condition and specify something more unique and more specific if you want to test it first on a little fraction. And also you can do it here. You can specify user in random percentile, for example, less than 10%, something like that. Feel free to play with that. Let's go next. Let's give it a name. So I'll just say personalized color. That will be my name of this personalization. That's how our parameter configuration is going to look like now. Just to make sure we're actually getting personalized value and nothing else, I want to delete this condition, and I will stop the experiment as well. But let me save this first. Let's go to the experiment. Yes. And let's stop. Yes, and this is fine. We don't like red, so I'll delete it. All right, so let's just make sure how my configuration looks like. Oh, okay, I think we did a reset. So let's quickly create this personalization again. These were the colors. We will optimize for the sum of the purchase revenue for all the apps, and we'll call it test for short. Save and publish. All right. Now we're going to take a look at how it actually changes the application behavior for me. So let's just refresh. What are we getting here? Okay, we're already getting personalized value. So for this user, we got the red one. Let's refresh the app, clear the storage, and see if the next user was going to get another behavior. And the next one is getting this dark blue color. So again, you don't have direct control over which users getting which color. You let machine learning engine to actually take some signals of the user behavior, learn from them, and optimize the experience for every user. And also, the same user might get different experience over time if the machine learning engine would decide and will see that it actually works better for this specific user. This is the strength of machine learning. And again, you always can target specific percentage of the users just to make sure that it works fine. This is how you use remote config features in the Firebase console UI. Now I would like to move to a little bit more technical part and see what does it actually takes your developers to implement it in the code. And for that, we're going to open Android Studio. And let's take a look at the integration. So first of all, actually, before jumping to the Android Studio, let's think of what we need. We need two dependencies. We need two SDKs of Firebase to be included in the app. We need Firebase Analytics, and we need Firebase Remote Control. As Boris mentioned, you don't need anything else or anything extra to set up A/B test or personalization. Those are based on analytics and remote control. To set up analytics, I recommend to go to your project settings. And here in the settings, you can actually select your application and see the SDK instructions. And this screen will actually guide you on what you need to do to enable analytics in your app. In particular, you need to download the Google Services JSON file and put it in the project directory. If your application would be iOS, you would see the relevant screenshot for Xcode and not Android Studio. The next thing, we need to add the Firebase SDK to the dependencies. We need to add Google Services in case of Android. This is very specific. It's not applying to iOS. And then we need to actually add Firebase Analytics dependency and to the build Gradle file of the application. After that, that's basically it. You don't even need to write any code to make analytics work out of the box. A certain amount of automatically registered events gonna start happening right away. But as I said, in order for remote configuration to work, we need to do something extra. So let's take a look at what it is. So here's my project. And I would like to start by showing you the dependencies that I have configured. Here we have the Google services that I mentioned earlier. And in the build Gradle file, we have this analytics. I also use Analytics KTX, which is a Kotlin extension. If your application uses Kotlin and not Java, this can be pretty handy, but not a must. You don't have to do it. And I also add another dependency of Firebase config. Another thing you can notice is that I'm using Firebase BOM object to specify the version. So I can just add any other dependencies without specifying the version. The BOM will pick the right versions to make sure that they are compatible with each other. Now, once I have added the dependencies, I will go ahead to main activity and initialize the remote configuration. So I do it in the onCreate method of the main activity. This is the entry level to the application. And setting up remote config is basically 3-4 lines of code. I'm getting remote config instance, and it's really convenient, but that remote config is actually singleton object, so you can do that in any place in your application. After I got the instance, I also configure some settings. I would like to stop here for a second and explain this set minimum fetch interval in seconds. This is something that you would probably only do in development mode. In production, we want to make sure that users don't fetch the remote config way too often. So if you'll set something really small and then you have a lot of users fetching, you might get an exception. More on that in the Firebase documentation. But when you're just a team of developers, you can set it to as little as possible to test your changes real quick. After creating this config settings object, where basically I only specify this minimum fetch interval, I'm gonna set those config settings to the remote config. Another note, if it wasn't very clear, whenever you try to fetch the remote configuration from the server, and it's been less than 5 seconds in my case, or less than whatever you specify here, instead of going and downloading the remote configuration from the server, the API will just return you the local version of remote config. Then we have seen when I launched my app for the first time that it had certain behavior which was not defined in the Firebase console UI. This is because I'm setting some defaults. There are 2 ways to set the defaults. You can either use an XML file like I do here. In this XML file, you basically need to replicate all the parameters that you're going to use in the Firebase console, so that you have some local version of them. And if there is no internet access, the remote config going to use those. Another option to do that is to actually provide the map and do this configuration here without using XML file. That's whatever you feel more convenient for you and whatever is more comfortable. Once we've done that, somewhere in the app where you need to actually fetch the value for a specific parameter, you can use this code. You go to remote config, give me a string of specific key. You remember that key should be the same as in the Firebase console UI. This is how we're basically getting the value for a specific parameter. But we also need to tell our remote configuration to fetch and actually update itself from the server. So as you've seen before, I have set it up on this swipe update gesture. So what's happening here when I do this swipe update is that I'm telling remote config to fetch and activate the remote configuration from the server. And then I add this onComplete listener. Basically, what happens here is that Firebase SDK will go and download the file, and it will try and activate it immediately. There are different loading strategies. Sometimes you want to download it and not activate it yet, and only activate it on the next launch. You can read more about that in Firebase documentation. But just so you know, the way I'm doing it in my sample app, I'm changing the UI right in front of the user. This might be kind of not the best practice if you want to implement this in the production app. So once I call fetch and activate, and this the remote config is actually being downloaded and applied, I'm just updating the UI, and that's what's happening here. And another thing that I wanted to show is actually whenever you use A/B test, and whenever you set up A/B test and you want to set up a test device, I wanted to show you the code that I used for that. So there is, 1 second, 1, 2, 3, 4. In the util activity, installation. Here, so there is an object called Firebase installations. It will be included in your app if you're using Firebase Analytics or Firebase Remote Config. So this is the code that can allows you to actually get this token that I used to target my device for A/B test when I wanted to specify specific variant. I think that would be it. As you can see, there is not much you need to do to actually make these things work. So I think we can go ahead, and Boris, if you would like to wrap up what we have gone over today, I think we can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Vitaly. In my opinion, it was amazing. So many details, so many nuances. Today, we learned what remote configuration powers us with. How do we start working with these features? So first step is implementing the remote config model into the app together with the analytics model. Okay, we saw today it's not very complicated. It can take a couple of hours. Next step, come with your hypothesis. Be brave, be bold. You have tools that allow to test your assumptions safely. And finally, measure and monitor the results and take data-driven decisions with Firebase Engage. You can see this data in console. Yep, I think we still have a few minutes for Q&A. Yeah, it's great to have Vitaly here as well. Let me start with the questions. Hayut is asking, how can I get this deck? Yeah, the presentation will be shared in the follow-up email and with some additional resources. And on this live stream page, it can be rewatched on demand. Yeah, all the deck and information will be shared. Rafika is asking, is there a way to test the changes in remote config before I publish? Yeah, as Vitaly, I can also answer it, and Vitaly can add your details. As Vitaly showed us, RC can be applied to a limited group of users, or even can be tested on specific device with Firebase house token. Definitely, it can be previewed before publishing. Vitaly, would you like to add any comment here?
I think you basically gave a great answer. So you can, first of all, you can target devices by using specific token that you can get from Firebase SDK. I think that's the best way to do for your test devices.
Awesome. Sebastian is asking, how is it possible to simulate an app like in the demo? Do you use some special tools or some special resources? I'll address this question to Vitaly.
Yes, I can take it. Thank you, Boris. So basically, I was using Android Studio, and I just created a sample app. Going forward, we might want to make this sample app open source and available for you to play with. We will consider that. Right now, it's not on the plan, but that's an option. And no, actually, no special tools or resources. It's basically just some code, and remote config is free, available for every Firebase account. So you can go ahead and play with that.
I'll add my 2 cents. When I experimented with it, actually, I built a Hello Worldish app in a couple of hours, and then I actually walk step by step. I would say that at the end of the day, I was able to test all the features on my simulator, so it should not be a problem. Another question from Rafika, do you have sample use cases, maybe per industry, or how we can use remote config features to improve conversions or user experience aside from color changes? Great question, and thank you, Rafika. There are use cases in the Firebase documentation, so I definitely urge you to see the use cases from real companies. I mentioned ad frequency. I mentioned customized purchase or subscription flow, localization. Localization, you can show a different message in different countries. Yeah, there are many interesting stories in the documentation, and thank you. I'll add this link to after the meeting. We have time for another question. Christian is asking, how does activation event work? How much time does it take from the activation event to follow into the experiment and get published values? What if experiment users are too less than the fired activation events? Vitaly, it's for you, I guess.
Yeah. So I think it would be great to double check this information. So take my answer with a grain of salt. But what I think is, whenever the activation event happens, the next time you're gonna fetch the remote config, you will get the A/B test value for the parameter under question. But I believe we will be able to get back on that just to make sure that this is the correct answer. Thank you.
Awesome. Friends, thank you for your questions. Thank you for your participation. Vitaly, thank you for being a partner in crime with me. It was, in my opinion, a wonderful demo. And see you on the next GMP episodes. Thank you very much.
Everyone.